The other day I was trying to order concert tickets online. It was a website that I don't use very often, and it had an old email address stored as my login. I couldn't figure out how to change my email address and get my tickets delivered to me, so I just didn't order the concert tickets and I didn't go. This is an example of a business process that was poorly automated, and that will be the focus of this course. After this video, you'll be able to define what a business process is, describe the components of a business process, and we'll also talk about the varying levels of automation with respect to business processes. As you can see from my example, a lack of automation can sometimes lead to a loss of business. Consider, for example, a simple software chore, which is a purchasing system that automates the ordering, billing, and shipping of parts so the salesperson can input a customer's order and have it automatically processed and delivered. Every business, nearly every business, has this type of scenario. We might model that scenario in something called a context diagram, and that looks like this. The context diagram shows the system, and in boxes around the system we have what are called external entities. There are several components or dimensions to a business process, and those are labeled in this diagram. You can see the process has inputs. In this case, the salesperson is entering the order, and the contracts department might be inputting the contract terms, such as net 30 or net 60. Also, the process does some processing, and that's represented by the central box here, the purchasing system. We will explore context diagrams in much more detail in future lessons. Processes also have outputs. So in this case, you can see the invoice and the shipping paperwork eventually go to the customer. And then we also have some sort of boundary around the process. There are certain activities that go on that aren't necessarily part of the process that we might look to automate. It's also important when we're first defining the process to note any assumptions that we might have. So for example, here, the pricing file is within the boundary of our system, but the contracts file is not. And we also have an assumption in this case that customers don't place their own orders. This is important to the overall definition of the system. You might think of other things that you might want to model when describing your system. For example, the customer might tell the salesperson what to order, so there's a communications channel there. However, that might be outside the boundary of our system because we've made an assumption that says that all orders in this case are placed by a salesperson, even if the customer is communicating with them by phone or email, for example. We might also have physical goods that move around. So in this case, maybe the parts that are being ordered. Do we have to show those in our diagram? Generally, we do not, because these diagrams represent data flows relative to the process and not necessarily the physical goods that are moving around. Context diagrams have a very specific syntax and meaning, and again, we'll explore that in further depth and detail in a future lesson. This is another example of a context diagram from a textbook that's showing a context diagram for a digital music download system that might be similar to what we know as iTunes today. You can see, just like our previous example, we have the process in the middle, external entities around the sides, and then data flows represented by arrows in the diagram. We'll explore these in much more detail later in the course. Business processes can be automated to varying degrees. Everything from completely manual processes like we might have had in the early 20th century, all the way up through a process and all of its exception cases being fully automated. In this course, we focus most closely on those processes that could benefit from an increasing degree of automation. In other words, just because it's a manual process doesn't mean that that's necessarily a bad thing that needs to be improved. There are many manual processes that work just fine. On the other hand, if it's a manual process that's causing a lot of pain, it might be a candidate for automation and analysis like we will cover in this course. In future lessons, we'll dig into how we analyze the process by first describing the as-is process and then modeling the to-be process with increased automation. You'll use the tools and techniques that you learn in this course in order to improve processes and add that increasing degree of automation.